and we are about to
Oh,
host.
shit.
Yes.
Alex Jones about to host this? Really?
Yes.
Real debate. Not where there's a whole bunch of canned questions, not where it's a bunch of corporate shills up there controlling the narrative, but where two very intelligent, at the same time, very different people from their perspective have a real debate. They can go 3 hours if they want. We're scheduled for 2. But
Okay.
when we get
2
into
hours,
the next
guys.
hour, we will take questions. We're going to post very soon up on X above the live feed of this so we can get some of those questions in from X and have your questions. I have a few questions for later. I imagine those will already probably be answered on both of their own prerogative. So Dinesh D'Souza, I've known him for 20 years. Was watching him and saw speeches he gave when he worked for Ronald Reagan as a cabinet official, best-selling author, filmmaker, former political prisoner, a true American success story. DineshD'Souza.com, on X at Dinesh D'Souza.
Getting the hype
host
cards
of
out
the
now.
D'Souza podcast. And then the 26-year-old phenomenon. I mean, I've known who this guy is for 9 years. Exploded onto the scene during the 2016 campaign. Nick Fuentes, America First, at Nick J. Fuentes, NicholasJFuentes.com.
And in the red corner, we have.
I am as well, but he's. Nicholas J. Fuentes is a bio. He sent us as a college dropout from Chicago, who's in his early 20s, 26. He worked on a campaign for Donald Trump 2016 and hosts a nightly show called America First that is reaching tens of millions of people a day conservatively. So both men are very different ways, but obviously in general are obviously both very articulate and very popular. And so.
Okay, so we obviously know who's going to be in the debate. So we're waiting for them to show up. I'll pull it back here in a second. I did want to cover a couple of the chats while we're waiting.
Okay.
Datter AF Danevang says, "Hey Atlas, you should do a video on Destiny blocking his own son for supposedly denying the Holocaust.
Whoa.
Widest timeline ever."
You know, what I will say is I saw that his son, I forget what his name is.
Fuentes, and then after that, you probably won't hear from me for almost 30, 45 minutes. I'm going to try to shut up and have a real debate. There's nothing more frustrating than these debates where there's constant interruption. So, Dinesh, thanks for accepting this debate. And I'm glad it happened. Glad it got done. Thank you so much.
Hey, don't worry. I'm moving.
Thank you, Alex. Welcome, Nick. I am looking forward to our debate. And, it's I'm thrilled to do it because free speech has been under attack. And you guys, Alex, Nick, Laura Loomer, and others have been deplatformed. I am a strong opponent of all of this. And for this reason, even though some people were like, why do you want to debate Nick Fuentes? I'm like, no, there are taboo issues here that are being raised. They're not being adequately discussed. Some people run away from them. I don't run away from them. And I think it's a good idea to sort of have it out. And so that's really why I'm here. I want to defend Trump. I want to defend MAGA, Make America Great Again. I want to defend America First. Seems to me we have a big disagreement here about what America First means. And that's what I want to talk about. When we talk about making America great again, it's important to think about what made America great in the first place. Now, one obvious answer to that is that America became great by kind of looking inward and attending to its own problems, going back to the founders.
Audio sound okay now, guys?
But that is not only not entirely true, it's not true at all. Right after the American founding, Thomas Jefferson found out that there were these Barbary pirates in the Middle East. Now, they weren't attacking America. They weren't starting a war over here. But Jefferson basically dispatched an armed force to clobber them, to beat the heck out of them. Why? Because they were disrupting our interests. They were disrupting our trade. They were hurting our position in the world. So even though we had this infant democracy, clobbering bad guys is something that we started doing from the very beginning. Now, fast forward to, Alex, you and I are in Texas. And let's talk about the middle of the 19th century. Again, America's building a strong country. It's focused inward. But guess what? We get into a big war with Mexico. The Mexican War lasts about 4 years. We started the Mexican War. We go over there, get our troops into Mexico City, clobber the Mexicans, take a good chunk of Mexico, including a good chunk of Texas. Later, large parts of the country that were not part of America become added to the country. And we do this basically by force. Now, we have good reasons for it. I'm not going to go into the reasons, but the point is we did it. Fast forward now, I'm going to omit World War II and focus on Reagan. The Soviet Empire is gaining strength. The Soviet Union grabs 9 countries, 10 countries actually, between 1974 and 1980. They don't attack us.
1974 and
They're
1980, so
not
6
waging
years.
war over here. And Reagan does not start a war with them either. But what he does do is he starts clobbering them in all kinds of ways. He clobbers them in Afghanistan, he clobbers them in Somalia, in Angola, in Mozambique, in Nicaragua. And we do it by supporting armed forces that are repelling these Soviet armies, and we win the Cold War. Who can deny that the world is better off and America's better off? That is America first. And that is making America great again. So when we're talking about making America great again, it has never meant, and it doesn't mean for Trump, a kind of, isolationism. I would even deny that it means no new wars. And I say that because no president who takes an oath to support the Constitution can make that absolute guarantee. There are all kinds of scenarios, and I'm happy to lay out about 6 of them, in which the United States would be drawn into a war. And so the pledge is made as a statement of principle, but Trump is the commander-in-chief, and it's his decision to make at a given time when the situation is dangerous enough that there should be a war. Now,
I just
there isn't
bumped
a war
Dinesh a
going
little
on
bit,
in
guys.
Iran, but I do want to say about the Iranians this. They are not a regional power like Iraq. This is, I think, one of the key differences. A lot of people think Iran is Iraq, and Saddam Hussein is the same as the mullahs, and Trump is the same as Bush. He's becoming like Bush. No, Iran has a global ideology, and they always have. The reason that they chant death to America, they also chant death to Israel, but death to America is the main chant, and death to Israel is the secondary chant. Why? Because we are the
Bro,
lead
no one believes
enemy.
that.
We are the great Satan. Israel may be the little Satan, but we are the great Satan. And we are controlling Israel, not the other way around. At least that's how the Iranians see it. The little Satan is not telling the great Satan what to do. It's actually the opposite. The Iranian goal is a global caliphate that obviously involves global supervision, Sharia law, bringing it here, infiltrating this country, terror cells. And the nuclear weapons are just taking this global ideology and giving it enormous power. There's an old saying that says, what do you say to, what do you call a dictator who has nuclear weapons? And the answer is, sir.
This
what
is
that
aggressive.
means is that when a guy gets nukes, he's on a completely different level. You've got to, in a sense, be deferential in a way that you otherwise wouldn't. So here's Iran. They are cooking these nukes. They are building this uranium. They're enriching it way beyond any peaceful purposes. And Trump says, look, it's in our interest that they not have this weapon. Yes, it's in Israel's interest as well, but we're not doing it for Israel. We're doing it because we don't want them to have a nuclear weapon.
Okay, Dinesh, that's about 5.5 minutes.
Yeah, bro.
We'll come back to you. You guys
Dude,
can free
bro,
for all
shut
in a
up.
moment. Nick Fuentes, and something you said, Dinesh, I'm just going to add a small caveat and then go back to you guys. So I'm going to say it up front. I appreciate you doing this debate. I appreciate Nick and you guys having this idea. I forget who came up with it, but I think if I remember correctly, Nick challenged you and you said sure. And then, here we are 2 weeks later. So thank you both for doing this. But exactly what we're doing is what the left, who is diabolical against free speech, does not want. They don't want real debates. And so this is very, very healthy and very, very pro-freedom, pro-America. And I appreciate you both for being here. Just wanted to add that. So thanks for reminding me of that decision. All right, Nick Fuentes, you've got about 5.5, 6 minutes. Because Dinesh went a little bit over because I didn't stop him. So Nick Fuentes of America First.
Alex Jones already failed.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And,
There it is.
I'd like to start out by saying as well, I appreciate Dinesh D'Souza for doing the debate. And I actually appreciate him saying that because it is true. We have both been brutally censored. And I know that Dinesh was also targeted by the Obama administration. So, we're really all sort of in the same boat in terms of we've all been persecuted to some extent. So I appreciate him saying that. But I'd like to move on and get into the subject of the debate. And I actually like how Dinesh framed it. I agree with him. The central question concerning the Iran war is, what does America first mean? What is the United States involvement in Iran, or what should it be? And how does that conform to the stated goal of putting our country first, making America great again, and pursuing the American strategic interest? And without going into the Barbary Wars or Reagan or any of that, we don't need to go back that far. I think we need to talk about the current strategic landscape in the Middle East. And we need to get some things down first analytically before we proceed. And I'm actually going to pick up where Dinesh left off at the end and kind of start with that premise, because that is, I think, the mainstream premise. Let's say that's a status quo accepted premise of the U.S. Media, or the conservative media, is that Iran is an apocalyptic regime. They have global ambitions. They're led by religious zealots and fanatics. They're racing towards a bomb because they want to attack Israel and the United States. And I would say that with that analytical framework, you probably would say that it's justified that we go to war with Iran. I would probably agree under those circumstances. But I would clarify a couple of things. Let's say that in the first place, this is not the first regime that has been described this way. When we were at war with the Soviet Union, it was conservative military planners that said the exact same thing. They said the Soviets are a nihilistic death cult. We can't negotiate with them. Khrushchev said, we will bury them. They want to destroy the United States. Of course, we negotiated with them. Of course, Nixon had détente, and eventually we negotiated with Gorbachev, and the wall came down, and we didn't have to go to war. We said the same thing about Maoist China. They killed 70 million people. They're a communist death cult. We negotiate with them all the time. They joined the World Trade Organization. I don't think anybody would argue that communism is not a nihilistic global ideology with ambitions to take over the planet. It certainly did. It always had. Yet we negotiated. Let's also talk about Iran's nuclear program. And once again, let's sort of do some housekeeping. Iran does not have a nuclear bomb. They're not currently pursuing a nuclear bomb. And what you would call Iran is a nuclear threshold state. They're engaging in something, and this is technical, it's called nuclear hedging. This is where you have the technology, the expertise, and the infrastructure to make a nuclear weapon, but you don't actually build one. Why do you maintain the threshold latent nuclear status? You maintain that in the event that the security situation changes. There's a few countries, actually, not just Iran, they're in the exact same boat. And those countries are South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. They're all considered nuclear threshold states. They have the expertise, the infrastructure, the technology to make a bomb. Why do they have that expertise? Why do they maintain the threshold status? Because they're on the doorstep of China. China is a much more powerful country, and they themselves have a native nuclear program. They engage in nuclear hedging in the event that they need to deter a threat from a regional adversary. Does this sound familiar? Why is Iran pursuing nuclear hedging? Why do they have a threshold status? They have this because Israel is the only country in the Middle East, actually, that has an undeclared nuclear weapons program. They have a nuclear arsenal of 200 bombs. They're not a signatory on the NPT. Israel's the only country with a nuclear arsenal, and they're Iran's sworn enemy. Let's also talk about the history. The United States overthrew the government of Iran in 1953. A democratically elected prime minister wanted to nationalize Iran's resources and put Iran first. He was overthrown by the CIA. The United States installed a brutal dictatorship. The Iranian people revolted against it. Ever since, the United States and Israel have been at war with Iran, and we've destroyed all their neighbors. We went into Iraq and overthrew Saddam Hussein.
All right, Nick, I don't mean to interrupt you. I just said 5 minutes. It could have been 10 minutes. You guys are both smart to talk for hours. So at this point, just let Dinesh come back and counter that. And then you guys this is a real debate. You guys can have a free for all.
Yeah, let's get two games up, man. Let's see them.
So I'll just pitch you back to this.
React to
you
each
can
other.
leave off where you were stopping there. Nick Fuentes, go ahead.
Yeah, terrific. I mean, Alex, I think you only jump in if we are interrupting too much and can't make our points, or either hogging all the time. And I think otherwise, I'm happy to just go back and forth. I'd like to just address a few of these points, and we can kind of get into it further. So I'll start by kind of correcting a couple of points that I think are just fallacious. The first one is the idea that the Soviet Union was said to be some kind of a maniacal, nihilistic power. No one ever said
go ahead.
that.
You can bam
Not
jam
only
if he
that,
keeps spamming.
but the whole premise of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, was based upon the idea that you have two completely rational adversaries, And each of them understand that the deployment of nuclear weapons, the one against the other, will meet with catastrophic retaliation. Never once did we dream that Khrushchev was like a suicide bomber, or Brezhnev or Andropov or Chernenko or any of the Soviet leaders going back to Lenin. We knew that they valued their lives. We saw them as protecting their own interests. So the idea that there's some kind of we've heard all this before with Russia and China, that's not true. The idea of negotiating with the Soviet Union was the liberal idea. It was the idea that when you make treaties, people behave themselves. And I think Reagan exposed that to be fundamentally stupid. It misses what human nature is all about. It misses the lessons of Machiavelli and Clausewitz and Sun Tzu. It misses the idea that treaties are simply disguised ways that powerful countries advance their own interests. No one is going to sit down and make a treaty because they want to. You make treaties because you have to. You make treaties, by and large, in which you concede things that you would have lost anyway on the battlefield. Now let's look at Iran, for example. If it's true, first of all, a word about Mossadegh. I heard Nick use the word democratically elected. Mossadegh was not democratically elected. He was not elected by the Iranian people. He was, in fact, appointed by the Shah. Let's remember that the Shah was in power in 1953. So if you have a dictator who's running the country, how does someone get democratically elected? So I think this is actually taking up a talking point from the left, and a bogus talking point also. By the way, the first thing that Mossadegh did when he came in, he dissolved parliament. So this democratically elected guy dissolves the very parliament that supposedly put him into power. So he was an autocrat, in some ways no different than the Shah. There was a power struggle. Yes, the CIA was involved. Mossadegh was overthrown. In my view, that was a very good thing. Now, some people will say, well, that's what caused the Iranian Revolution. Wrong. The Mossadegh business was in 1953. The Iranian Revolution was in 1979. Are you telling me that the Iranians were really mad, but they decided to go on a 25-year vacation and then decided, okay, now let's work ourselves up into a frenzy 25 years later? The reason we got Iran is basically because of Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter decided that the Shah was a despot. He didn't want to support the secret police. He pulled the Persian rug out from the Shah, and basically we got Khomeini. So this is the nincompooperi of Jimmy Carter. He tried to get rid of what he saw as the bad guy, and we got the worst guy.
And we had a regime. Respond to that, but we're not doing a bunch. This is a great debate, but we're kind of doing a history lesson, debating history. Go as long as you guys want. We go 3 hours if you want. I hope we get into the current stuff, the final Trump saying they may have a peace deal Monday, the Israel lobby, all of that. But I'm going to stop there. Nick, come back. You start going back and forth there.
Sure, I would come back and, I don't want to turn it into a big history thing about the Soviet Union and communism, but I would say that's simply not true. I mean, it was credible, and this is what the Pentagon believed in the late 60s and early 70s, is that the Soviets thought that they could survive a first strike against the United States. The idea that mutually assured destruction was always the law of the land. There's this revolution in diplomacy because of nukes. It's just belied by doctrine. And during the 60s and 70s, we believed the Soviets are more powerful than us. They had more nukes than us. And we thought that they were going to strike us first. They thought they could survive it. And the rhetoric about the Soviets was the same. They have this global ambition, domino theory. They want a global revolution. It was exact same stuff that they say about Iran. And yet we never invaded the Soviet Union. We didn't need regime change in the Soviet Union and to go in and decapitate the regime with airstrikes. It just isn't true. We negotiated. So I would say that's in the first place. But we don't need to relitigate the history of the Cold War. And the second place of Mossadegh is really neither here nor there, the exact particularities here. The point is this. The United States and Israel pursue regime change across the entire region. That's the point I'm trying to make, and I didn't get to finish in my opening statement. We overthrew Iran's government once, and you admit it's a CIA coup in 53. In 1979, the people are furious because of the secret police, because of the white revolution, because of the reforms that were made under the Shah. They overthrow the Shah's government, the Western-backed government, because they saw it as a puppet. And the Islamic Revolution enjoyed broad support in Iranian society. What took place ever since then is regime change, one regime change operation after another. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Egypt, Syria, you name it, whether it's the Arab Spring and it's these soft power color revolution coups or it's ground wars or it's civil wars. Yeah. That's the business we do. And we do it no matter who it is. We do it against secular dictators. We do it against people that cooperate with us and those that don't. Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapons in 2003. We backed airstrikes against him anyway in 2011. We backed Saddam at one point. We oversaw the dismantlement of his nuclear program. We went to war against him in 2003. We said we weren't going to war against Assad in Syria. We did. He's now overthrown, and now you have ISIS in power. This is the history of the Middle East. And this gets to the reason of why Iran wants a nuclear weapon. It's not because they want to kill everybody. It's not because they're fanatical and we can't negotiate and they're trying to bring about the end times and the eschaton. It's because they want to deter the same fate, regime change, would happen to all of their neighbors. That makes them rational.
Okay, let me stop you. I said I want to interrupt. You guys are both too polite. Every 2 or 3 minutes.
And truth be told,
that goes back to what Dinesh
and I'll keep this very short. How do you, on principle, as an American, ask another country to disarm themselves? I mean, on its face, that principle alone is just one thing I can't stand about our attempt to denuclearize the other countries.
Then that speaks to why they would want to. I mean, there's a lot to say here, but go ahead.
Yeah, one of the mullahs, right in the middle of all this, one of the key mullahs made a very key admission. He said, this is not about Iran. This is about Islam. Right there, you get the heart of the matter. These mullahs, and yes, there was a broad-based Iranian revolution, but the mullahs in that power struggle took power. And they have ruled dictatorially over Iran now since 1979. They've made the Iranian revolution semi-permanent. But the key to understanding that revolution, going all the way back from when they seized the American hostages to the strike on Beirut, 1982, to the fact that Iran has been sponsoring terrorism, not just in the region. They have tentacles in Venezuela. They have tentacles in South America. They have cells in the United States. They are making an alliance with Russia and China to create a kind of axis of power. So to the degree, Nick, that you're saying that this is a global chessboard, I agree. And I think that, in a way, puts an interesting question for us, which is that isn't it a fact that there is a jihadi or radical strain of Islam? This ultimately is what is driving a lot of these radical Muslims, right? They are Hezbollah, Hamas. It doesn't matter whether they're Shia or Sunni. Hamas is Sunni. Why is Iran funding Hamas? Because they don't care about those distinctions at the end of the day. At the end of the day, they care about whether you're an infidel, yes or no. This radical Islam is a global ideology. Look, you can say the mullahs keep saying it, I don't believe it, but you should believe it. When the Russians said that they wanted a global triumph of communism, they meant it. We took it seriously. And by the way, we didn't end the Soviet Union through some sort of a treaty. We ended the Soviet Union by bankrupting them. Reagan ultimately defeated them in the Cold War. It was not a treaty. It was they were out of gas. They couldn't compete in an arms race. We were building MX missiles and putting multiple warheads on them. We were building a missile shield. We were supporting guerrilla revolutions around the world. That's ultimately, Afghanistan became, by their own admission, a bleeding wound. So this is why the Soviets gave in. They didn't give in. No country ever gives in because of a treaty. The idea that communism is abolished
you can't
itself,
get over the fact that
Eastern
he's
Europe was
praising Reagan.
freed because we put a piece of paper in front of them and they went, oh, okay, let's get rid of all
1933, the
this
US
stuff.
came out
We
with
were
gold
once a
standard for
global
domestic
empire. We've now
transactions in
become a second-rate
1933
superpower.
under
That's
President
not how it happened
Franklin
at all.
Roosevelt.
And that's
And
the
it ended in
misunderstanding of
international
Iran.
competition.
Islam is a
downloaded to
conquering
gold in
force. The
1971 under the
Muslims came out
President
of the
Richard
Arabian
Nixon.
desert. How do you think they conquered the Holy Land? They took Jerusalem. They took Syria. They took Jordan. They conquered Iran by force. That's how they got it. They are the occupier of Iran.
Okay, Dinesh, and by the way, you're both very smart men. I've studied the history. You're both
Dude, if Alex
accurate
says that
in
one more
basic facts.
time, bro.
Very interesting. A lot. I'm not saying the general public's dumb, but even really smart.
Who's winning
people
right now?
really-
Nick
most
or
of them can't
Dinesh,
find around
guys?
the map. So
Not really a
I don't want to throw this in. I figure
debate,
very
but it
smart,
looks
Dinesh,
like-
trying to throw the debate either way here, but very smart to get into America versus Iran up front. I was imagining, and I'm not trying to steer this, though I want to spend some time on it, the whole issue of Israel and the Israel lobby and where that sits, because I know that's Nick's bailiwick. And, so that's just something I'm throwing
Nick's
out there as
bailiwick.
well, because
What
that's
does
why a
that
lot of
mean?
Americans have seen, I'm not saying I love the Islamists or any of this, but we've seen regime change. Now, the former head of Al-Qaeda in charge of Syria, we see, Hamas being, Israel helped set it up, as a counterbalance. Then we've got, Iran, all of this. And so I think a lot of Americans just don't believe the intelligence establishment, even though I wouldn't cry at night if the mullahs fell. So, what about the AIPAC Israel issue in all of this, Dinesh, for like a minute?
Well,
I
can I respond actually
Sure,
to
go
what
ahead.
he said?
Oh, sorry, I apologize. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. I just want to have
Let's
equal
go.
time. But I mean, with regard to this, there is just like this, and forgive me if this sounds I'm trying to be cordial here, but I do believe there is this engine in the United States from the conservative movement that says it is about Islam. This is Glenn Beck's book. This is sort of the Fox News mantra. It is Islam. Islam is the problem. And I'm not an Islamist. I'm a Catholic. I'm not pro-Islam. And I wouldn't even call myself pro-Iran. I'm pro-America. And to sort of narrow the discussion, let's talk about Islamism. Let's talk about jihadism. I agree with you. There is an element of jihadism in the Middle East. There are these radical Muslims that they want to return to the faith of the pious ones, the ancient Muslims, the first 2 or 3 generations of Muslims. They come from Saudi Arabia. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Iranian-backed groups do not attack Americans on American soil. They're not global powers. They're local powers. They're regional powers. They don't attack the United States. They may attack the United States in Beirut or Iraq because the United States is in their territory. We're in the Middle East. We're in their neighborhood. We're backing Israel's brutal war on Lebanon in the 80s, where they commit massacres, castrating people, scalping people, brutal atrocities that are well documented that Israel, their own commission blames Ariel Sharon for this, the defense minister. So, they don't attack us on our soil. The terrorists that do attack us are Wahhabist. They're Salafist. That comes from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia spent billions of dollars promoting Wahhabism, which is the ideology of Al-Qaeda, of ISIS. We backed the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. We backed bin Laden. We do arms deals with Saudi Arabia. And you know what? To some extent, this radicalism is going away. And it came from Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, these other places.
Right.
And it's going away because we made a deal with Mohammed bin Salman. We did arms deals throughout. We're allies throughout, buy oil from them throughout. We didn't invade Saudi Arabia and install a Western liberal democracy. We don't like your regime. We're going to drop bombs on you. We negotiated with them over time. And by the way, they were the biggest problem. As far as Iran is concerned, it's important to analytically determine their strategic interest, because that's how you determine what we have to do about it. Israel wants regime change in Iran.
Over there in
That's
Saudi.
why Iran wants a bomb to deter this, which is a credible fear. Now, the United States won't let Iran have the bomb. Now, if you want to give Iran the Soviet Union treatment and bankrupt them through maximum pressure and sanctions, that's what we were doing. But you're calling for regime change. We didn't do regime change in the Soviet Union. We allowed them, and we went in there, actually. George Bush managed it, I think, in a good way. We managed a peaceful transition of power after a long period of soft power and smart power that we used against them. You're saying we need to go in and invade Iran, or not maybe invade Iran, but force them to have regime change with CIA operations, foreign media, maximum pressure sanctions, backing Israeli operations. And I would say that's not in America's interest. That's what Israel wants. That's not what we want. Regime change has a terrible track record from Libya, Egypt, Iraq, Syria. There's 0 success stories. I think that I agree with you in some sense.
Just a lot of
we
dead
don't want a
Americans.
nuclear Iran, but we need to understand why we're on the threshold of one. And that has to do with Israel's ambitious and aggressive actions.
Netanyahu.
In my opinion, the move is restrain Israel, stop them from attacking Iran, get Iran to come back to the table, and try to get them to agree to some kind of framework like the JCPOA. And maybe we could talk about the JCPOA, because to me, that is the most important precedent to all of this.
I am trying to equal time. I was throwing a quick question back to Dinesh to give you a longer response, because I'm glad we're having this debate. I just figured it would be about the current situation. I love
Also,
the history.
InfoWars, man.
Still in that.
Up the
I'm
bit
glad
rate.
you guys are so informed and trying to educate people. But just
Similar quality
in
from there,
general,
man.
you guys go wherever you want, counter back what he was saying, Dinesh. But then I would like to just interject. The current crisis, where do you see it going? The Fatwa, Trump saying, I'm going to kill, you're lucky I don't kill you. I might kill you, the Iranian leader, which I support Trump and love him. But, that was provocative. And also ask you guys where you think this is going. And is there a path for peace? And then a larger debate, which I figured you guys would get into first, about the Israel lobby.
See, Alex wants to talk about Israel.
Let me say some things about regime change to lay a foundation of what I think the MAGA view on this is. Because I think the MAGA view on this is a repudiation of Bush, but it's not a repudiation of Reagan. In fact, it's a restatement of the Reagan principles, although admittedly in a very different situation. Obviously, in the 70s and 80s, the Reagan focus was on the Soviet Empire. The situation now is totally different. But there are a lot of really bad regimes in the world. And these are regimes that harm our interests in all kinds of ways. So ask a simple question. Is it in our interest?
Dinesh is reading from a Fox News teleprompter
and I'll be happy
right
to
now.
go through a list and we can agree on what they are. Would it be a good idea for these regimes to have change? For the bad guys who are running these regimes to go, get away, for the regimes themselves to be toppled and for something else to take their place. So if
I
we
think
look
America
at Iran, for
needs a
example, I would
regime change.
say I am willing to take any chance on getting rid of the mullahs, these jihadi mullahs, these people who wish death to us and are building up the means to do it. Oh, and I don't know, okay, maybe Nick's right. Maybe he's wrong. I tend to believe the mullahs over Nick. They say that they want to have global jihad. They say that they want a global caliphate. They say that they're building up the strength to do it. They're allying with other people who certainly do have nuclear weapons and do have that kind of power. So would it be a good idea to have regime change in Iran? Would it be in our interest? Forget about Israel. Of course it would. Now, a separate question is, what are we willing to expend for that to happen? So my question to Nick is, all right, let's start at the very beginning. Would you be willing to expend 50 cents to get the mullahs to leave, to quit, to go home, to become refugees and go to other countries? They can go to luxury apartments in Qatar and elsewhere, and let the Iranian people have a plebiscite. We're not going to go in there. We're not going to arrange tribal meetings. We're not going to take over the country. We're going to let them fix it. I would be very confident that what comes after, whatever it is.
The reality is like, obviously it would be in every country's best interest to flip over a regime so that that country would now be sharing that country's interests. That's a retarded argument. It would be in every country's interest to do regime change.
Lead to the mullah, so he's giving them a much more rational account of the Iranian interest than he even gives of American interest. I mean, every time he talks about America, he uses the phrase we. But let's remember that we've had alternating regimes between Republicans and Democrats. So he mentioned the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring was basically an anti-American operation organized with the help of Barack Obama. Barack Obama wants Iran to have nukes. He was trying to create space for them to do that and give them money to enable them to do that. Why? Because Obama has an ideology that's anti-American. So we can't just say we and take the blame for what Obama did and what other
Dinesh,
people
I'm
did.
just watch the clock, trying to just be a referee here. Good points, Nick.
Well, that's a lot to tackle there. I would say in the first place, and I have to address this first just to get it out of the way. When you say we take the mullahs at their word, you're citing obscure one of their clerical leaders, and you say, well, that guy said it's about Islam. That defines their whole regime. If you want to take them at their word, let's go to the supreme leader. The supreme leader is the top cleric in Iran, the top cleric in Shiite Islam. It's in their constitution. Supreme leader's got to be a cleric. The Ayatollah promulgated a fatwa 20 years ago that says that attaining nuclear weapons and using them is against Islamic law. And that has been cited over and over again in 2005, in 2015. In recent negotiations, they say the supreme leader says it's contrary, and I could give you the quotes, completely to Islamic doctrine to have nuclear weapons. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say we're going to take them at their word when one guy in the government says we're going to take over the world, but you can't have it both ways and say we can't listen to the supreme leader say we don't want nuclear weapons. We have to do one or the other. I'll just say that first. Then we get further, we get into this question.
Nick, may I ask you a question about that?
Well, can I think okay, sure. Yeah,
okay,
we'll
go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, well, so, and then with regard to regime change, I would contend that regime change is just not desirable. You say, well, how much are you willing to expend to pursue regime change? I'm saying I don't think it's desirable. And here's the evidence for this. You say, well, I'm confident something better will happen. There'll be this democratic plebiscite. What is the history of regime change? When Hosni Mubarak was overthrown in Egypt, you got the Muslim Brotherhood, Islamism, Mohammed Morsi. When Gaddafi was overthrown, you get warlords, you get civil war. When Syria was overthrown, you get ISIS. You get this guy al-Julani, who's literally from ISIS and al-Qaeda. In Afghanistan, you still have the Taliban. If we overthrow Iran, and by the way, here's the other evidence. When Israel attacked Iran 2 weeks ago, they thought that the government would collapse and the people would rise up and they would overthrow the government. This is what they said for years. The opposite happened. The people rallied to the supreme leader. They said, we're under attack from a foreign entity. They actually rallied in the streets, and there were major funeral processions for the martyrs, the IRGC leaders that were killed. They rallied behind the government. If anything, if this government goes down, I don't know where you think we're going to get something better. We're going to get something more hardcore. The reason why it matters to articulate Iran's interests is to say, if their worst fear is regime change, which is the credible fear of all leaders, every leader wants to stay in power. No leader wants to meet the fate of Gaddafi. No leader wants to be deposed and live in exile. If their credible fear is regime change, and we pursue that in one form or another, and it's a little naive to say they're going to come together and have a new government. CIA and State Department and Israel will be all over that, just like they have in all these other operations. You're going to get hardliners. You're going to get IRGC commanders that said, our worst nightmare happened. Now we're really in a apocalyptic war. Now this is the end times. The United States overthrew us.
Okay,
so I'm against regime change.
I'm going to watch the clock here. Do you want to answer Dinesh's question or just go back to...
While it's doing that, I adjusted my audio a little bit. Looks like people are saying there's a big difference between my audio and the stream audio. Just keep hinting to me if it's changing or improving.
To this larger theme here a little bit, because look, I mean, Nick, you're 26, and so it's understandable that your view of history, you keep saying history, a regime change is about history, and the history you give is like 4 years old. Your compass is so narrow that you don't understand that I could give you 40 examples of regime change through history that have all worked out beautifully. Some recent, some more ancient. There was regime change in Spain. Franco fell. Spain became a democracy. You had autocrats all over South America. Those regimes all changed. Many of those countries are much better off as a result. The United States produced regime change in Mexico. There was a dictator named Santana. He was the one who actually came and fought against us in the Alamo and in Texas. Ultimately, Santana was overthrown. That was excellent regime change. I'm not even counting, of course, the Nazi regime in Japan in World War II. The Soviet Union was regime change of an excellent quality. So regime change sometimes works and sometimes it doesn't work. A lot of times it depends kind of on who does it and how. Now, here's a key point, and of course, Alex has brought up Israel. I want to get into Israel, so I'm happy to do that. Here's the point I want to make. It is very much, in my view, in our interest and Israel to have regime change in Iran. And if Israel is willing to do it, I would say more power to them. I think Trump is stopping them. Trump says, no, I'm going to save the life of Khamenei. And so Trump, in this sense, I think, is more allergic to the risks of regime change and willing to keep the mullahs in power. But what's really important here is Israel is not controlling Trump. It's the other way around. If you leave it to Netanyahu, you leave it to the Knesset, they would like to overthrow the way around. If you leave it, what's really important here is Israel is not controlling Trump. It's the other way around. If you leave it to Netanyahu, you leave it to the Knesset, they would like to overthrow the mullahs and they have the power to do it. And the fact that they're not doing it shows that, again, to use my old phrase, the great Satan is controlling the little Satan and not the other way around. There's another example just from today. Trump, the little Satan, and not the other way around. There's another phrase, the great Satan is controlling the little Satan and not the other way around. There's another example just from today. Trump is basically pressuring Netanyahu to have a 60-day ceasefire in Gaza. Now, first of all, Israel has every moral right to level Gaza. And what I mean by that is, quite honestly, when a country attacks you, when you are invaded, just like if there's a home invasion, some guy comes into my house, rapes my wife, kills my daughter, kills my kids, and then he runs away and I chase after him. And of course, I chase his car down, I stop him. He jumps out of the car, grabs his own kids and sticks them in front of him. And then he goes, don't shoot because women and children are in front of me. No. What you've done, you put your children in danger, first by invading my house, and second by using them as human shields. I am not under any moral strictures based on what you did to me. I have every right to attempt to destroy you, and the suffering of your women and children is the result of your actions and not mine. So my point is, once you had October 7th, and October 7th, by the way, bankrolled by Iran, planned in Iran, Israel has every right, strategic, moral, political, to strike out at Gaza and to strike at Iran. And so the United States is the one that's tying their hands. And so once again, even with this Gaza treaty, you can see that the man in charge, the numero uno, is not Netanyahu, it's Trump.
Okay, so
Israel break the ceasefire a few days
I got to say something here. Dinesh, you're a great guy. I respect you, love your films, interviewed 20 years. But the analogy of somebody breaking your house, raping and killing your wife and daughter, then you chase him down so he uses his kids. They're still innocent. And look, I get it, 50,000 dead in Gaza, the whole liberal media making it the biggest thing ever. I'm sad it happened. The left loves the war in Ukraine, over 1 million dead. But, and I understand what we did to Germany in World War II. I know Israel's argument. But to say that if somebody uses their own kids as human shields, I don't know, if somebody killed my wife and daughter, they use their kids as human shields, I'd wait till they drop the kids, or I'd, whatever. I just think it's an oversimplification.
Well, you wouldn't wait till they drop the kids. What you would look for a clean shot at them. But if you accidentally hit their kids, whose fault would it be, yours or theirs?
Alex just took his side.
I get your point. That's fair. Touche. So go ahead, Nick. I'll stop interrupting.
Yeah, well, I forgive me, but I have to do this. You said that I'm a young man and my view of history is so short. Well, let's talk about some of your history here. You were a big supporter of the war in Iraq, and I want to actually read and go back to what you said about it in 2003 and 2007, because I think this is fair. You said in 2003 that Saddam's support for terrorism, his attempt to acquire nuclear weapons, makes him an imminent danger to world peace and security. That was in 2003. 4 years later, you said the important point about the wars is that 50 million Afghans and Iraqis are free. And for the first time in their history, they can control their own destiny. Liberals emphasize the negative and relish the failures of American foreign policy. Now, there's a lot of other quotes here, but this speaks to the kind of hubris of the neocons, of the interventionists, of advocates for regime change, which is, just like in 2003, there is this alarmism. They support terrorism. They're building nuclear weapons. Now, both of those things turned out not to be true. There was no connection between al-Qaeda and Saddam. Saddam did not have nukes. Then there's this justification after the fact. Well, it doesn't matter because it's going fine. Well, 20 years later, guess who took over Iraq? Iran. Iran filled the power vacuum. Guess who retook over Afghanistan? The Taliban. So, you can talk about like Germany and Japan. I think those things are fundamentally different. For starters, because Japan attacked us first on our soil in Hawaii. I mean, that's fundamentally different. But in terms of regime change, this does harken back to Iraq. And I've seen your videos where you talk about the dissimilarities between the two situations. I think they're very similar. Now, as far as Iran, I don't even want to get into Gaza because that's a little bit, we can later, but I want to talk specifically about Iran. In one of your videos, you say, well, unlike Iraq, where we had to rely on government intelligence, with Iran, we know about their facilities. We know where they are. We've seen the tunnels. We've seen the centrifuges. We know what they're doing. Well, isn't that sort of precisely the point? When the United States made the nuclear deal with Iran, they adhered to it for years. The deal was made in 2015, and from 2015 to 2018, the IAEA said they were in compliance with the deal. They had 24-hour monitoring, they had cameras, they had inspections, and they were in compliance with the deal. It wasn't until a year after Trump pulled out of the deal and forced all the other Europeans to pull out as well, and we reneged on our commitments. We pulled out and didn't give them sanctions relief. We, through secondary sanctions, forced the Europeans to pull out, and they didn't get sanctions relief. It was only until 2019 that Iran started to gradually renege on their commitments. And it went in succession where America killed Qasem Soleimani, which is one of their generals. Then Iran began to enrich without limitations. They enriched and they engaged in all nuclear activities without any kind of restrictions. It wasn't until 2021 when Israel attacked Natanz twice, cyber attacks and sabotage attacks, that Iran began to enrich to 60%. Every action has this equal and opposite reaction. Iran was a partner in 2001. Iran helped us build the Northern Alliance. They helped us put Karzai in power in Afghanistan. A few months later, George Bush calls them the axis of evil. This is how we treat Iran. Now, I'm not defending.
I'm just looking at the clock. You guys interrupt each other just every few minutes. Maybe I should just go bing, and the other person interrupts. You guys are so polite. Dinesh?
All right. Well, first of all, I want to do a mea culpa here because I was wrong about the Iraq War. Not because I said Iraq had Iraq War. Not because I said Iraq had nuclear weapons. Of course, you remember with George W. Bush, the claim was that they had these so-called weapons of mass destruction. Not quite the same as nukes, but the idea was it could be chemical weapons. It could be a weapon that could kill a large number of people. Now, this information, which was given to us from high levels in the U.S. government, I think was the first case of where we learned that we can't always trust the government. And we can't trust the government because these intelligence agencies have their own agenda. And this was a neocon scam. And I got to say, I might have been a little too deeply in the neocon world. I went for it. But unlike a lot of the neocons, I broke with them. Most of my former colleagues at AEI won't speak to me. I left the neocon camp, which is now basically the Never Trump camp. And I came into the Trump camp because I think that Trump was based on the idea that, look, we've learned some valuable lessons from the Iraq War, and that is this idea of trying to occupy other countries is a great mistake. By the way, the United States had every right to blow up the Taliban, to chase them out of power. Those were the guys who supplied the monkey bars for 9/11. So if you're talking about a direct attack on the United States, yes, it was Al-Qaeda, but the Taliban was a hospitable regime that trained them. What we should have done is turn to some rival tribes, there are plenty of warlike tribes in Afghanistan, and said, listen, we're going to turn it over to you. You keep kicking their ass from now on, and we're out of here. But we didn't do that. We went over there. We started, conducting meetings and talking about women's rights and a whole bunch of nonsense. And the whole thing backfired on us. So that's a bitter lesson that we've learned. And I think I'm with you on that, Nick. All right. But Iran is a different animal. And I think this is the key. Iran is the one that is threatening Israel, not the other way around. What does Israel want out of Iran? You think Israel wants to go occupy Iran? You think Israel has designs on Iran? Israel has one of the smallest, most godforsaken pieces of earth on the planet. They are just trying to hold onto it. And by the way, it's theirs. Now, what do I mean by that? This is a very important issue, because how do you get a country? I mean, how do you get the title deeds of a country? There are really only three ways.
You fight for them.
One way is you're the original inhabitants, right? Like the Native Americans are the original inhabitants, they go, it's ours. That's one way. The second way is there's some sort of a negotiation, a treaty, if someone gives it to you and you get it that way. A third way is conquest. That's how we got large parts of Mexico. That's how the United States now reaches from one end of the ocean to the other. We took a lot of it by force. So that's the third way. Most of the boundaries of most of the countries of the world are established by war and by nothing else. Now, interestingly, with America, you could say that on one side, the Native Americans have the right. They were here first, so they have the title deed. And then you can say on the other side, well, we conquered them, we fought a war, they lost, that's that, so it's ours. But with Israel, all the arguments benefit Israel. They were the original inhabitants. They were there for 4,000 years, going back to the time of Abraham. Number two, they were awarded Israel by the United Nations in 1948. And number three, they have fought multiple wars, at least three, 1948, 1967, 1973. They beat the combined invading armies of Syria, Jordan, Egypt. So the Arab world united against them. They kicked their butts. And so whether you're looking at
who's the original inhabitants or
who took it by conquest.
I just looked at the clock like 5 minutes. So we're running over, Nick. I got to be fair. Nick, you got 5 minutes because I just let him run for 5 minutes. Go ahead. It was great. I was listening. Sorry, I got to go ahead.
That's funny.
Yeah. Once again, it just gets back to the analytical framework for the conflict is that these are rational actors, and maybe we'll get into Israel's objectives. Iran wants a nuclear arsenal to deter an attack from the United States and Israel. I think that's a credible fear. The United States' interest is they do not want nuclear proliferation. So we don't want Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. We don't necessarily have an interest in regime change. Israel's strategic objective is to overthrow the government of Iran. And why? It goes back to the Likud party and their takeover of the government in the late 1970s. They witnessed what happened in the Camp David Accords, which is that Egypt got the Sinai back in exchange for peace. They witnessed some of the Israeli ministers try to negotiate with the Palestinians. They called it land for peace. We'll give you some of the West Bank in exchange for peace. We'll give Syria the Golan in exchange for peace was the idea. They thought that's what was going to happen. And these Likudniks, the people that have been running Israel basically for 50 years, nearly uninterrupted, they said, we can't keep giving up land in exchange for peace. They said, we need to go on the offensive. This is in Oded Yonon's plan for the 1980s. He was an advisor to Ariel Sharon. This is in the Clean Break Memo in 1996. And in both of these doctrines, and this is consistent throughout 20, 30-year period, they said we need to go on the offensive and we need to basically destroy all the big states that are supporting Palestine, all the big states that might pose a threat to Israel. And that is why they push for regime change against Saddam. That's why they push for destabilization of Syria. And ultimately, they saw Iran as sponsoring Hezbollah and the Shiite groups in southern Lebanon, and then eventually Hamas. And so Israel has an interest in what they call creating statelets. They don't want big, powerful regimes like Nasser's Egypt, like the Assad dynasty in Syria, like Gaddafi in Libya. They want small, manageable fiefdoms where they're going to dismember Libya into like 3 countries, dismember Syria into Druze, Alawite, and Sunni, dismember Iraq into Shiite, Kurdish, and Sunni. They want to do the same thing to Iran. And that is because, and I agree with you, Israel wants to be safe, but you characterize Israel as small and fledgling and just trying to hold on to their land. They're the only nuclear power, the most sophisticated, most powerful military and intelligence operation in the Middle East, as evidenced by this very one-sided conflict.
Factual.
And what they want to be safe is regional hegemony. In order to be safe from all threats, they want to make it so that there are no threats. That's why the road to Israeli safety and their right to exist runs through regime change, destabilization, and civil war. And so I'm saying, look, that's probably in their best interest, but it's not in ours. And so that's why I agree with Trump. We should pursue diplomacy with Iran and try to get them to give up their nuclear program with limitations and restrictions without regime change, which is unpredictable and has negative effects for us. Israel wants the regime change, and they want us to pick up the pieces and clean up after them, just as we did in all these other countries. And we deal with the terrorism and the hatred, and we deal with the high gas prices and all the rest of it. So that's the America First position. Restrain Israel from pursuing regime change, restrict Iran's nuclear program. You can use maximum pressure and Reagan doctrine to do it. I'm fine with that. But I think diplomacy is preferable, and that's in our interest to try it. That's my position.
Okay, so I want to go back to this here.
That was
and
probably the best 5-minute spiel.
15 minutes of this is amazing. You guys stay as long as you want. I also want to get to questions from X, and I'll just say, because I'm not trying to throw this either way, I have complex views. I know it's all nuanced. I think both of you are making great points, and I'm public about that. I want to blow up Israel. And I also, and I don't like the mullahs, but I don't want to have war with Iran. I know most of the people don't like it.
To blow up Israel.
My issue is, we saw Netanyahu strike them first and drag us in. And look, I know that they're proxies. Iran's been striking them in Lebanon and in the West Bank and Gaza and with the Houthis. And I mean, nobody can say it started first, okay? And Iran, does make all these statements, rhetorical. We're going to drive you in the ocean and blow you up and all the rest of it. Okay, so my larger, sure, Dinesh, I'm going to go to you. I've been pretty good here. I just want to, and I got some questions coming up here very soon for both of you, and we're going to go to questions. But honing in, because both of you guys are very smart, and I'd like to hear it's a debate, but also a discussion. What do you think's about to happen? I know, Dinesh, you have amazing context. Trump today says twice at Alligator Alcatraz that, we got a deal Monday, you're going to love it, and Netanyahu's coming and all this. And usually Trump doesn't just bluff. That sounds really good. Then you have the mullahs putting out a very rare fatwa against Trump and Netanyahu on Sunday. So just in general, looking at that, but I will just say, Israel initiating the latest round and us coming into it, a week into it, and then all of that, and then I can predict the media was going to say it didn't take out the sites. Clearly the sites were highly damaged or obliterated, but then did they hide fissile material? Then the mullahs we're going to go all the way to enrichment, and we did hide it. And it's like, to get out of this, the mullahs seem to do whatever it is keeps it going. It's very bizarre. So it's easy for me on straight Western politics to know who the sides are, what the interests are. When you get into these mullahs and things, it gives me a headache, basically. So, as a moderator, I'm supposed to just have easy answers here. A lot of bizarre behavior. Why would the mullahs put a photo out? Well, because maybe they're about to fall. We're seeing some evidence. Their foreign minister on TV contradicting them, saying the nuclear sites were basically destroyed. So the intel I'm getting is they could fall. What happens if the mullahs are cornered then? And you see, this just is a complex issue. So you guys can finish up with your round of debates about the history and who's who or whatever. My point is, these are two sides absolutely diametrically opposed to each other. And like Trump said, both sides don't know what the fuck they're doing. They've been fighting so long. I agree with that. How could, generally, gut level, where do both of you see this going? We'll go to Dinesh first and finish up with Nick's response if you want. But then where do you see this going next? Can this be de-escalated? What are the paths out of this? Dinesh D'Souza.
Yeah, the reason I keep anchoring our discussion, not just in history, but kind of in the facts on the ground, is because it's hard to have a debate when the facts are really fuzzy, right? So you mentioned, Alex, that Netanyahu struck first. Guys. But if it is true that Iran was a driving force behind October 7th, then Israel did not strike first. Israel struck second. Second of all, let's remember a lot of times, if we go back in history, not very far, Hitler attacks Poland and Great Britain declares war on Germany. Japan attacks the United States at Pearl Harbor. Did we just go to war with Japan? No, we didn't. We sent Patton starts taking U.S. troops into Europe. We went after the Nazis, even though the Nazis did not attack us directly. It was the Japanese who did. All right, let me turn to Nick. Nick says that it's the goal of Israel to somehow topple all the big, strong powers in the Middle East. And let's test if that's true. Which are the big, strong powers in the Middle East? And the answer is, certainly in the Muslim world, there are three. There is Saudi Arabia, there is Egypt, and there is Iran. These are the three big boys of the Middle East, and they are jostling, by the way, for power, the one against the other. Israel has excellent relations with two out of the three. Now, the only reason Israel doesn't have excellent relations with Iran is Iran continues to not only plot and scheme, but openly declare and fund military forces, Hezbollah, also Hamas, that are aimed ultimately at eradicating Israel from the map. That's the meaning of from the river to the sea. So Israel is willing to get along with powerful forces in the region. It's made friends with some of them. It gave back land to Egypt. It's on good terms with Saudi Arabia. I think it would be on good terms with Iran if Iran wasn't driving the aggression from its side. So I completely reject Nick's idea that somehow Iran is fighting a defensive war. Nobody wants to invade Iran, least of all Israel. Israel would like to have nothing to do with Iran. They've got a successful society on their own. Now, you're asking about Trump and kind of where all of this is going. And I think I want to highlight the simple point that, look, Trump is actually a kind of master of this kind of, well, I'm going to call it mafia diplomacy. By that, I mean that he acts like Don Corleone. He twists people's arms. He basically tries to pull everybody into line. And sort of this idea, number one, when Trump basically even started talking about the idea of striking the Iranian facilities, there was a massive scream on the part of the, let's call it the Nick Fuentes camp, but there were many others in it. This is disastrous. We're going to be in a war. We're going to have
Dinesh
tremendous casualties. The Iranians are going to strike back at us. Just wait for it. None of this actually happened. So if I'm going to show a little modesty about Iraq, it would be good for Nick to admit that he and so many others were completely wrong about what the effect of Trump's strikes were going to be. Number two, Israel is a country of 10 million people or 12 million people. The United States is 350 million plus. Are you seriously telling me that Israel is controlling America?
All right, let's stop there. You've got 4 minutes. Let's look at Nick, and then we're going to go to break and come back. I've got questions, and then listeners have questions from X. Nick, responding to that.
Sure. So to address the first point, Saudi Arabia is not a major power in the Middle East. We give them a lot of weapons and things like that, but Saudi Arabia has a small population, mostly foreign workers. It's held together by this weird dynasty from 100 years ago because they sell oil. They couldn't even defeat the Houthis in Yemen. I mean, they were at war with the Houthis for 10 years with American backing. They said they were fighting Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. They couldn't beat back these guys. They're pirates, effectively. So Saudi Arabia is not a major power. And what's more is they're effectively in a relationship with Israel already. They, like the Emirates, like Bahrain, are going to enter into the Abraham Accords. They're submitted to Israel. And that's the fate. If you are against the West, if you're against Israel and the United States, you get overthrown, you get regime changed, you get invaded, civil warred, or you're like Egypt and Jordan, where you get bribed and become a Western puppet to Israel, and Saudi Arabia wants to follow suit. So I would just say that, and that's obviously the case also because Netanyahu and other ministers in the Israeli government have said for 30 years they want regime change in Iran. That's just not even disputed. In the mid-1990s, they're calling for regime change. In 2006, Netanyahu's calling for regime change. They're publishing videos all the time in Farsi and English saying the Iranian people need to rise up. It's just not even a question that they do want that. And they want that because Iran is a rival. Iran has one of the largest populations. It's often said about the Middle East, you've got three countries, Turkey, Egypt, Iran. The rest are tribes of flags. Iran has a big middle class, big economy, oil wealth. They have a lot of intelligent people. They're a threat to Israel's security and hegemony in the region. And that's why Israel wants to depose that country, along with all the other ones with ambitions, whether they be Islamist or Pan-Arabist.
Curious what you guys think about, because I always kind of ask these questions about factions and stuff.